How's everybody doing? Well, I wanted to speak about the movie Napoleon by Ridley Scott, Joaquin Phoenix, Vanessa Kirby. While it was fresh on my mind, I just got back from the theater. I took notes while I was watching it because I wanted everything to be fresh in my mind. I wanted to have kind of all my thoughts organized, and I wanted to bring you as quick a review and kind of my overall thoughts, but also kind of a detailed run through of what this movie covers and what it shows, what it doesn't show, and my overall thoughts about the movie. So a couple of things I want to do with this. First of all, I want to give you kind of my overall impressions of the movie as a whole, what works, what doesn't in terms of the story and the narrative and the history. This isn't really meant to be kind of my specific breakdown about what it gets right historically and what it gets wrong. I will talk some about that, but mainly I just want to kind of give my overall thoughts, but then give you kind of a step-by-step breakdown of exactly what the movie does cover. So that those of you who haven't seen the movie yet, you can kind of go in knowing what to expect, or you can decide whether or not you even want to see it in the first place. So my overall thoughts, first of all. It was good. It wasn't great. I didn't come out of there blown away like, wow, what an amazing movie that was. And I honestly went in expecting to like it. So keep that in mind. Like a lot of times when I hear like reviews from critics and things like that, I usually tend to like movies more than critics do. So a lot of times when I hear a critic pan a movie, I hold my thoughts thinking, you know what, just because they didn't like it doesn't mean I'm not going to like it. In this case, I'm probably a little closer to a lot of the critics than I typically am. Like I went in wanting to like the movie, expecting to like the movie, and just kind of feeling meh about it afterwards. And you know, it's a challenge because I do know the story so well, and I am so fascinated by Napoleon. I don't know how much that colored my opinion of the movie. I will say this. I liked Joaquin Phoenix as Napoleon more than I expected to. Like I went in kind of thinking, man, why would they pick him? He's like the age Napoleon was when he died. He's way too old to be Napoleon at Toulon, for example. But it was less of an issue than I thought it would be. And Vanessa Kirby was, as expected, fantastic as Josephine. So I thought that worked. I thought overall the casting in general was good, but honestly, with a couple of exceptions, none of the cast really stood out to me where I was like, wow, this person was fantastic as this role. Because honestly, other than those two and maybe Talleyrand, nobody really is in the movie enough to where you even really remember them and think, okay, yeah, this person was prominent. You know, it was Napoleon, Josephine, and kind of everybody else. Everybody else is kind of almost like a background to me in this, except for the actor who played Talleyrand, who I feel like Talleyrand was pretty significant in the movie. Napoleon's brother plays kind of a vital role. Joseph is in a lot of the movie. But honestly, beyond that, it really, everybody, you know, and there's a lot of people you see prominently. Thomas Alexander Dumas, for example, is prominent in there. But again, you don't really hear their names really ever. You don't really see his marshals portrayed in any significant way, things like that. Honestly, this is not a movie about the Napoleonic Wars. The battle scenes are few and far between in this movie. It's really more the story of Napoleon and Josephine and everything else kind of as it relates to them. So there's a couple of big battle scenes, but honestly, they're not the focus of this movie. So that's kind of my overall thoughts. I wonder how much people are going to be able to follow the story if they don't know the history. Because honestly, to me, it felt disjointed. Like it didn't feel like a story. Like it didn't feel like a very cohesive narrative start to finish. It almost felt like we were kind of dropping in and out of the story of Napoleon at key moments and seeing little snapshots. Like here's a 3-minute scene of part of it here. Here's 4 minutes of something else here. And a lot of it just felt like that. It felt like just a bunch of snapshots of Napoleon's life pieced together in a movie. So let me just kind of run through the main storyline of this movie. and just give you just really a synopsis of the movie itself and what you will see and what you won't in this movie. So honestly, the very first scene, almost like a prologue, is Marie Antoinette's execution. It's really quick, and it's only like a couple minutes. Like a lot of the scenes, it's only like a couple minutes of the movie. It's really kind of an introduction to the character of Napoleon, who we do see present, even though we know historically he wasn't. But really, it immediately jumps from there to the situation in Toulon. And we're introduced to Napoleon as an artillery captain. And so Toulon's kind of really the first big scene. And the Toulon scene's fantastic. It's one of the best scenes of the movie. And I thought Joaquin Phoenix did a really good job of portraying a young artillery captain kind of really experiencing significant combat for the first time. And you see kind of his bravery, but also his kind of questioning himself and kind of the hesitance and really everything you would expect from somebody really first leading troops in a significant battle for the first time. And I thought he did a great job with that. So I thought that was done really well. And the scene itself is fantastic. It's visually stunning. Everything you'd expect from a Ridley Scott movie. That scene was one of the best of the movie, is the attack on Toulon. There's a really shocking scene where Napoleon has his horse killed from under him, and it's pretty graphic, but it was really well done. I thought that whole scene was one of the best of the movie. You also immediately get, as you do throughout the movie, you can tell you're introduced to the fact that Napoleon is a prolific letter writer, which he was. We have tens of thousands of his letters, and you get a lot of voiceovers during the movie of Napoleon writing letters to his brother, writing letters to Josephine, things like that. And we get one early on with him kind of telling the story of what's happening with Toulon, writing to his brother and everything. From there, we go into the scene where we're seeing the end of the terror. We're seeing the downfall of Robespierre, and the scene with him shooting himself to try and get out of being executed and failing with that. And then that transitions into a scene of a mass of people who are in jail and they're getting out. And right at the back of this mob of people that are in this big jail cell, we briefly get a glimpse of Josephine for the first time. And she was imprisoned and probably only lived because of the downfall of Robespierre. So that's all very accurate. And so from there, we are introduced now to the story of Napoleon and Josephine. Napoleon's going to see Josephine for the first time at this survivors party for people who survived and ended up not being guillotined. And it's really awkward at first, their meeting, and it's really kind of uncomfortable in some ways, their initial scenes together. And I'm guessing that was done on purpose. But then we get the royalist insurrection. And again, like a lot of the scenes in the movie, this is one of the most important moments in Napoleon's life. And it's over like that. Like they show one shot of grape shot. They don't really give a lot of background into it. The whole scene's a couple minutes long and that's it. It's powerful, but it's quick, like a lot of the scenes. And immediately we jump to the next thing. And we get the marriage of Napoleon and Josephine. And one of the first scenes that they have together before they're even married, she's basically telling him, listen, I'm kind of, I'm a player, and you need to understand that's who I am, and you need to be okay with that. And at their dinner party, the night of their marriage, she's already flirting with some guy at the table, and he's kind of watching this. And so that's kind of immediately, their story is immediately, okay, he's married her, and she's already playing around on him. There's nothing about Italy. They don't show Italy at all. We immediately jump from their marriage, which kind of coincides historically with him getting the command of the Army of Italy. The very next scene after their marriage, he's in Egypt. And there's a real brief reference in a letter where he says something about winning victories in Italy, but that's all you get as far as Italy goes. There's nothing that shows his victories in Italy. And honestly, if you were somebody who wasn't familiar with Napoleon's story, you would not come away from this movie thinking that was one of the greatest generals of all time. They just really don't do anything to show you his military genius. I mean, there's like the one scene that I'll get into from Austerlitz, and that's about it. But there's really nothing that makes him stand out as this incredible general. It's almost like an afterthought again, like I said. So they show him in Egypt, and again, the Egypt scene, like honestly, what you saw in the trailer with the pyramids and all of that stuff, that's most of the Egypt scene. I mean, there's very little to it. They show the armies lining up for the Battle of the Pyramids, and Napoleon's artillery fires, and you see the shot that hits the top of the pyramid, which of course never happened, and a bunch of huge bricks come flying off the pyramid, and that's it. You don't see the battle. You don't see anything else really in Egypt. The only other scene you see in Egypt is the one with him and the mummy with the hat, which is in some of the trailers online. And then there's a scene of him having one of his generals come up to him and tell him that Josephine's having an affair back home in France. And that's it. That's Egypt. That's all you get of Egypt. You get nothing of Italy. You get very little of Egypt. And Napoleon immediately makes the decision he's going back to France because his wife's having an affair. And that's really all you get. You don't hear anything about the political situation or any of that. He goes back and he shows up at the house, and Josephine's not there, and he's reading a newspaper, which is making fun of the fact that he's been cuckolded by his wife, and he puts all of her stuff outside, and she comes home in the rain to see all of her stuff put outside, and the door's locked, and she can't get in, and they have a big fight, and then they reconcile, and there's, again, a really awkward scene with them where basically she's telling him, without me, you're nothing, and she makes him say it to her, and then later on he's telling her how important he is, and it just, the whole thing was very awkward to me. So he's kind of despairing over all of that, and we do get a glimpse during the Egypt scenes of the voiceovers of some of the letters he wrote, which was true. He was desperately writing all these letters to Josephine, and she wasn't writing back, and he was like really concerned about that. So that was all true. So he returns home, and we do get a little bit more of a focus on what happens next, which is the coup of late 1799. And so they spend a little bit of time on this, more than they do most things. So we get to see a lot of what goes down with that, and we see a little bit of the politics are at play, and we see the scene where he goes in and almost gets killed by the assembly, and then has to come back in with the army, and his brother points the sword at him and says, I would stab my brother if I thought he wasn't going to uphold our democracy, and that whole bit. So they do show all of that, and they show how he becomes first consul. And immediately now we're going to start to get, actually this is about, for me, where the movie starts to actually get a little bit interesting. Because now we're starting to see the politics, and we see Napoleon kind of trying to reach out with an olive branch to England and try to make peace with them, which he absolutely did. And he's trying to make peace with Austria and with the Russians. And so he's starting to, do the diplomatic game. And there's a reaching out by Talleyrand to the Austrians and things like that. And now we're going to start to get the story where Napoleon is someone of importance as first consul, and we realize that Josephine is not getting pregnant. Even though she has 2 children from her first marriage, she is not getting pregnant from Napoleon, and that's becoming an issue. And it's becoming a strain on their marriage, and they do spend a lot of time focusing on that. And then boom, next thing you see is his coronation as emperor. We jump pretty much from 1800 to 1804 with nothing. No wars, no battles, no political machinations, nothing. It's boom. All of a sudden he's emperor. And there's no explanation as to how that came about, why they made him emperor, why that was necessary, what led to it. It just, nothing. So we have the coronation. That's, again, kind of an extended scene. And again now, because he's emperor, because he's royalty, there's the pressure to have an heir. And then we're going to start to get one of the main battle scenes we're going to get, which is Austerlitz. And you've seen some of the clips of Austerlitz in the stuff that's been online already. And it does go into a little more detail. But again, we don't get a ton of a glimpse into Napoleon's brilliance as a general. We just basically see him choosing the ground and then waiting for the Russians and the Austrians to show up. We see a little bit of a scene with the emperors of Austria and Russia sitting over breakfast, kind of talking about how they're going to beat Napoleon, and that's really all we get. And then the whole battle's over in like 10 minutes. And you see a good bit of it with the ice, but there's a lot that leads up to that. And you have him kind of unleashing parts of the trap. But really, again, you don't get a ton of glimpse into the strategy of Austerlitz, why it was so brilliant, why it mattered so much, only that he defeats the Russians and the Austrians. And so then we get a scene where he meets with the Emperor of Austria. And they have a conversation about how Tsar Alexander's so upset about the defeat that he won't come and meet with Napoleon. And they just talk about that briefly. And then really honestly, one of what I thought was one of the best scenes in the movie is the disillusion of Napoleon and Josephine's marriage, which is actually quite a few years after Austerlitz. And it's one of the better acted scenes in the movie, and you can really feel the heartbreak in the movie. In that scene where they really don't want to do it because they're both still in love with each other, but Napoleon needs an heir and it's not going to happen with her, so he's got to do it with somebody else. And so you have that all go down. And again, even that, there's a scene where Josephine's kind of almost breaking into laughter while she's reading the prepared statement she has to say. And he kind of stops and slaps her to make her kind of focus on what she needs to do. And that whole bit, which I wasn't real crazy about that. But so then he meets with Tsar Alexander and they talk about an alliance and they talk about marching on Asia together and what an incredible way of putting it to the British that would be. And they talk about their mutual disdain for England, and they talk about the blockade and some of what is going to eventually lead to Napoleon having to invade Russia. And then we go right from that to his marriage to an Austrian princess, which we only see her in a handful of scenes. And then right after their marriage, boom, he's got a son, and he takes the son to Josephine so she can meet the son, and it all just kind of happens, boom, boom, boom. And right from there, we go immediately into the invasion of Russia. And they give really just a very quick synopsis of why that was necessary, why he feels he has to invade Russia. And so if you've seen the clip of Napoleon riding into combat with his saber in a cavalry charge, this is where you get that scene. It actually takes place in the Battle of Borodino, which, again, Borodino is maybe like 1 minute of the movie. It literally is that fast. That's how little of it they show. They show him charging in, which I don't think there's any indication that actually happened. Then they real quick flash up on the screen, Battle of Borodino. Here's how many casualties there were. And the next thing you know, his army is arriving in Moscow, a very empty Moscow. And so he arrives in Moscow, and he almost acts like a petulant child at this point because he's so angry that Alexander has outsmarted him. And he basically acknowledges, wow, I didn't think Alexander had it in him to pull something like this off and actually abandon his capital city. He's like, there's supposed to be 300,000 people in this city. Where are they? And he kind of gets angry. There's a very powerful scene where he goes kind of into the throne room, and there are birds that are crapping all over the place, and he sits down on Alexander's throne, and you see bird droppings fall on the arm of the throne right next to him. And then the next scene, you see him sleeping, and he wakes up, and there's fires everywhere, and he comes outside and sees the fires. And they briefly show the retreat from Moscow. Well, first he says, we're going to march on St. Petersburg then, and we'll see if he'll burn that city too. And they said, no, we have to go back to Poland and wait for the winter. They show the retreat from Moscow in like a little bit of a montage that lasts a couple of minutes. And then boom, the very next scene is Napoleon signing the abdication in Paris. Like, that's what I'm saying. It just goes boom, 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 boom. And everything happens so fast. If you didn't know the history behind it, you probably wouldn't really be able to follow it as a cohesive story and a narrative. So right after that, he immediately goes into exile. They show him on Elba. And again, not a lot to that. While he's in Elba, they show Tsar Alexander showing up to meet Josephine, which did happen. In fact, he was one of the last people to see her before she got sick and died. But this is one of the main continuity issues that I didn't fully understand why they decided to do it the way that they did. They actually they kind of juxtapose Josephine getting sick and her death with Napoleon's escape from Elba and his return to power, which her death actually kind of coincides with his initial exile. She dies in late May of 1814. So that's when he first abdicates and goes into exile. So she's been dead for a year by the time Waterloo happens, but we're told basically that that's kind of happening almost at the same time, that Napoleon coming back and the lead up to Waterloo happens as Josephine is dying. But he shows up and wants to see Josephine, but she's already dead. He's embraced by the army, and honestly, for all that we know about how much Napoleon was loved by his army, this is the one and only time we see that in the movie, is the scene where he's confronted by the army and they've raised their guns and he's basically, hey, here's your emperor, you're going to shoot your emperor. And they all, long live the emperor, and they embrace him and they cheer for him. And that's really the only scene we really get of Napoleon being loved by his army and connecting with his men at all. So we then get a brief scene of the Congress of Vienna, and that's where we see Arthur Wellesley for the first time, the Duke of Wellington. He's there, Talleyrand's there, King Louis XVIII is there, the Tsar of Russia and the Emperor of Austria are there, and basically Wellington is the only one who really speaks, and he basically says, we're going to deal with this guy once and for all. And then you go to Waterloo, and honestly, Waterloo's the best scene in the movie. It's the only real extended battle scene we get that lasts for better than 5 or 10 minutes. It's beautiful, it's incredible, it's epic, it's everything you want this entire movie to be. But really, Waterloo is the only scene I felt like pulled that off. The Waterloo scene's fantastic. It's really well done. It's easy to understand. You can follow the steps that are happening. Again, of course, it's condensed for time. And I don't know how many of these scenes we're going to get fleshed out more in the 4-hour director's cut. But honestly, Waterloo's the best scene of the whole movie, without a doubt. And then we end with a totally fictitious scene that never happened, which is the ship that's going to carry Napoleon to exile in St. Helena is docked in England, and Wellington comes on the ship and sits down and talks to Napoleon and tells him, you're going to be exiled to St. Helena, and you very nearly avoided being executed, and there's no evidence to my knowledge that Wellington and Napoleon ever met face to face. So I'm not entirely sure why they threw that in there, but they did. And then we get a couple of quick scenes of Napoleon on St. Helena, and he's starting to grow a little bit of stubble, and you hear voiceovers of Josephine basically inviting him to come and be with her, and he falls over dead, and that's it. So that's the movie. I mean, that's basically a synopsis of the entire movie for you. And like I said, I liked it. I didn't love it. I wasn't blown away by it. It was very meh to me. Is it worth seeing? Yeah, it's worth seeing. But don't be surprised if you're a little disappointed, especially if you are somebody who is fascinated as I am by the Napoleon story. It left me wanting a lot more, and I'm hoping that the 4-hour director's cut will deliver a little more, because this is not a story about the Napoleonic Wars. This is a series of snapshots into moments of Napoleon's life played out on the screen in a big budget way. So if you have specific questions about anything in the movie, let me know in the comment section below. I will do my best to answer those for you. I tried to answer as much of it as I could in this, but let me know and I'll try to get to as many of those and answer those questions for you as best I can. I do hope you will check out the movie and see for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.